Well, hello. My name is Andrew Euler. I'm the Deputy Director of Programs at the TPA, and this is our 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan virtual workshop. We're also going to have an in-person workshop tomorrow, but in this virtual workshop, we're going to provide an overview by our consultants, Kimley Horn with Stuart Robertson, and then we're going to have a little more in-depth look at our website and the tools and resources we have to get involved and how to look at projects throughout Palm Beach County. And this is really culminating into the final adoption of our LRTP in December by our governing board. So it'll be seen by committees in December and then for our governing board. We're going to take questions right after Stuart finishes the overview of the LRTP, and then we'll jump right into the website, and we'll provide any answers to additional questions. And then you can get involved and stay involved all the way through December. So Stuart, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your interest in the Palm Beach TPA's Vision 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan. My name is Stuart Robertson with Kimley Horn. I'm the Consultant Project Manager supporting the Palm Beach TPA on its Vision 2050 LRTP. And on the next slide, you see the purpose of a long range transportation plan, which is something that every metropolitan planning organization around the country conducts. Every MPO participates in this process. Vision 2050 is the TPA's LRTP, and this is part of the core work products that any MPO conducts. Essentially, any project that would be considered for inclusion for transportation funding by either federal or state transportation funding sources should be identified in the LRTP. The timeline for this process began in the summer of 2023, where the TPA conducted a goal setting exercise and continued into the public engagement phase, including a call for projects where all state and local transportation agencies who are responsible for transportation systems within Palm Beach County were able to submit projects for inclusion within the LRTP. Then we continued into a needs assessment phase during 2023 and into early 2024 with our scenario planning, which included travel demand modeling, and then into the summer of 2024, where we looked at the funding that is anticipated to be available for federal and state sources. All of this process was a public process. We included several public meetings as well as opportunities for public engagement that I'll get into in a moment. And on the next slide, you see the urban area for Palm Beach County. This slide shows the 2020 census urban area boundary. The Palm Beach TPA does plan for the entirety of Palm Beach County, but also receives funds for implementation within the urban area boundary, which is shown in the hatched urban area boundary line on this map. Also, the federal aid network is shown as the magenta lines on this map. So those are the streets and roadways through which federal transportation funding would be eligible for implementation. As I mentioned, the LRTP has been a public process. There has been both what I call high touch as well as high tech public outreach on the project. So the high touch includes 18 public workshops that have been held, outreach presentations with local agencies and stakeholders, as well as interviews with key stakeholders as well. On the high tech side, the TPA has provided an online survey for public input, as well as commissioned a statistically significant survey of Palm Beach County residents to gain information about their priorities related to both the social side as well as the transportation priority side. We have a public comment map that's available on the TPA's website, as well as an online project map where we have been inventorying the projects that have been received from state and local agencies throughout this process. That's available for anyone to view on the TPA's website. So I mentioned the online surveys as well as the statistically significant surveys. I want to communicate some of the top priorities that the TPA has learned from these surveys, starting with the random sample survey. In terms of the broader community goals that were queried on the survey, the top priority that was identified was providing more housing that is affordable. That was identified by 26% of the respondents, Palm Beach County residents who responded to the random sample survey. The highest transportation priorities that were identified on the random sample survey, including number one, addressing traffic congestion, number two, expanding service for people who are economically disadvantaged, and third, improving traffic safety. The TPA conducted a goals, objectives, and performance measures task as part of the study. These are the goals by which the projects will be identified within the long-range transportation plan. The goals that were identified include safe, efficient, connected, multimodal, and resilient. So those are the buckets within which the projects will be placed. There's good news to report on the topic of federal performance targets. More stringent targets are being set at the federal level, and the TPA has been a leader and an influential voice in communicating the need for more stringent targets at the statewide level. So one of the key tasks of the project is the TPA's call for projects, which is where state as well as local agencies were invited to submit their priorities through the call for projects. And those are shown on this map. We have received over 1,300 total projects through the call for projects process. And these projects have been evaluated for inclusion within the various stages of the LRTP, which I'll talk about in a moment. But essentially, we've prioritized the projects that would align with the TPA's goals and identified them as either cost feasible, illustrative, or local desires. In addition to the local government and the state government call for projects, the TPA has conducted a needs analysis that's based on a technical analysis of mobility within Palm Beach County that has included various types of projects, including projects identified for safer walking and bicycling, public transportation, roadway capacity, and the other modes and technologies that are shown on this slide. So for the prioritization process, all of the project desires that were submitted by the state and local agencies, as well as the multimodal needs from the technical analysis, were put through a project screening process for their alignment with the TPA's goals and objectives. We also looked at what the cost for implementing these projects would be, as well as what type of scoping there would be for implementing the projects, as well as stakeholder input for public support for implementing those projects. So each of the projects were identified as either being cost feasible, which is on the right side of this slide, shown in green. Those are projects that would be expected to be able to be implemented with state and federal transportation revenue anticipated to be available by 2050. The second box here are illustrative projects. Those are eligible to be implemented through federal and state sources, but are currently considered unfunded because we have more transportation needs than dollars expected to be available. And then the third bucket here is local desires. So those are projects that are currently ineligible for federal or state funding that were submitted by those agencies for inclusion within the plan. So when I say revenue anticipated to be available, what do I mean by that? So essentially, an important component of the LRTP is identifying state and federal revenue sources that are anticipated to be available across the life of the LRTP, which in this case is through the year 2050. So So these would include TPA program estimates, generally speaking, federal transportation dollars that the TPA would have available to prioritize for implementation. We've also coordinated with the Florida Department of Transportation, or FDOT, to identify their funds anticipated to be spent on the Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS, as well as by the Florida Turnpike Enterprise. There are also certain state and regional discretionary grant programs that we have inventoried. And finally, FDOT operations and maintenance. So the operation of the state highway system and the maintenance of the state highway system is often an important source of implementing some of the priorities from the TPA, because oftentimes on these type of maintenance projects, we are able to upgrade certain components of the transportation network to meet current standards. So a little more information on the three different buckets of LRTP projects. Cost feasible projects identified by the TPA in the LRTP mean that they are projects that are expected to be able to be funded with federal or state transportation funding. These may include certain components of a project, such as a feasibility study, even if the entire implementation of the project is not anticipated to be feasible with current funding amounts. So, for example, the TPA may invest in a preliminary implementation plan for a corridor or a transportation facility that might identify a way forward and potentially a funding plan for a project to be implemented with certain discretionary grant funding, even if it's not feasible within the basic funding included within the LRTP. The illustrative bucket includes the unfunded TPA desires plan. So this would be projects that are supported and are consistent with the TPA's goals and objectives, but that are beyond the expected transportation revenue anticipated to be available. And then finally, the other local desires are all of the other projects that are either not eligible for state and federal funding or have not yet demonstrated a planning consistency, showing public support, showing environmental feasibility, and also funding feasibility with the agencies that would be expected to fund those projects. The TPA conducts an update to the LRTP every 5 years. The currently adopted LRTP is the 2045 LRTP, and the project that we are considering for adoption this year is the Vision 2050, which updates the 2045 LRTP to 2050. So you may want to know what are some of the new things that are identified within the 2050 LRTP, and we're highlighting those on this slide. So there has been an updated and refined analysis for the active transportation network, which are projects that would support safer and more comfortable and convenient walking and biking in Palm Beach County. Also, mobility on demand zones. We're seeing a lot of a shift toward mobility on demand within the transportation as an industry, and we're applying that here within Palm Beach County. Express buses to connect certain important components of the transportation network, including travel within, but also into Palm Beach County. A short and long-term transit implementation strategy to be able to implement better public transportation on the priority transit corridors. Working with industry to identify intelligent transportation systems that may include transit signal priority to provide buses with priority at signalized intersections. Freight activity areas that are looking at locations that we want to prioritize freight transportation. Electric and alternative fuel corridors, working together with industry as well as the Florida Department of Transportation to identify where these electric fueling stations as well as alternative fuel corridors will provide those opportunity for people that are using those modes of transportation. Local complete streets projects, even if they're not on the federal aid transportation network, The TPA can provide resources to local governments to implement local complete streets projects. And finally, feasibility studies, which may include things like looking at resiliency on the transportation network and identifying a plan to implement resilient strategies as well as additional safety and mobility for modes of transportation. Another example is the US 27 rail feasibility study, which is a study that's looking at the possibility of implementing rail in the US 27 corridor to move some of the rail traffic outside of the urbanized area. So how do we go from a project being identified in the LRTP to that project actually getting implemented? This slide shows the project life cycle from the initial project development and inclusion within the LRTP, which is in the blue box on the left side of this slide. That project would then need to be identified by the TPA governing board and included as part of its list of priority projects, or LOPP. This signals to the US DOT and the state FDOT to prioritize that project within its funding strategy. Then the project would be included in the draft tentative work program, which is provided each year by FDOT to the TPA for review. The TPA would then review the status of all of the projects that the state DOT is proposing within Palm Beach County and make recommendations for implementation. And then finally, a project could be included within the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. The TIP document, which is in the light blue area, the box on the right side of this slide, it essentially indicates a project's inclusion within the 5-year work program for implementation. So I'd like to thank you again for listening in on this virtual workshop. Some of the key upcoming dates that we have as part of the LRTP process are shown here. On October 17th at 2:30 in the afternoon, there will be an in-person workshop at the TPA offices in downtown West Palm Beach. We would love to see good attendance and would love to hear from anyone who's a stakeholder agency or resident or anyone interested in transportation in Palm Beach County at that meeting, October 17th. Also on October 31st, there will be a presentation to the TPA governing board at its regular meeting for October. And then in December, there will be another round of presentations where TPA staff will be recommending approval of the LRTP to its advisory committees on December 4th and 5th, as well as to its governing board on December 12th. So that wraps up my presentation, and I would like to pass it back to Andrew to continue the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. We'll pause here for a second. If there's any questions for just the overview and the process involved, we can take those now. And then we'll ask for more questions near the end, but you can always just type them in. Melissa, do we have anybody who's typed in any questions yet?
No questions yet. If you do have a question, as Andrew mentioned, you can use the Q&A function to type your question. And if we don't get to you at this point, we will definitely get to you at the end as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll switch over to our online tool. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. So on our website at palmbeachtpa.org/LRTP, it brings you to the main page. And on here, you can see our different ways of getting involved. The one for today was the public workshop, and the materials for those workshops are available. So on the public workshops, it talks about the virtual event that's going on right now in this meeting, our in-person event tomorrow, and there's some workshop resources. So if you're unable to attend in person and you want to see the boards and the materials we'll have at that workshop tomorrow, they're available here for viewing. But also on our page, we have two other ways of looking at the information. We have our draft LRTP, which will bring you to the actual document. and you can submit specific comments on the LRTP on the same page on a fillable form, and we'll respond to those. But another good tool we have is our map. And so with our map, you can see all the products within your community. And so this is symbolized by those same prioritization tiers that Stuart just went through that are in our LRTP. They are the green cost feasible products, the darker blue illustrative products, and then the light blue with the local desires. And so you can zoom into your community wherever you'd like to see, and then filter by those prioritizations or by product type. So for example, if I just wanted to see complete streets and pedestrian bicycle projects, that also includes some lighting projects, you can zoom in and see those products that are going to be cost feasible, illustrative, and local. And so if you were maybe a stakeholder and you were wondering about a local product and why it may not be, where did it end up? Did it end up in the illustrative or cost feasible list, or did it stay in local? You can look at this, and if you have any feedback for us, you can use the form, or you could also use this website to submit those. For example, if you would like to do that, over on the left-hand side here, we have a review a project. And all you need to do is to click on a project. So here's one in West Palm Beach for Village Boulevard that has been identified under cost feasible. And so when you scroll down here, it looks like the phase that was funded was the study, the PD&E. So that is the phase that looks like was a product submitted by West Palm Beach. It was one that's aligns with TPA goals and objectives, but it looks like it needs a little bit more work for feasibility in order to move it into the full total cost of the project. And so for this product, once you click on it and you're already looking at the review a project, you can scroll down, state if you support it or not, and then provide feedback on that in here. Or again, you can submit it on our online comment form or attend our workshop to provide that feedback. On the left-hand side, if you sort of get lost in the app, you can always refresh it. There's a refresh button, and it'll go back to the overall view. If you're looking to get even more details on products, we do have a few other fields. There is a product sheet that's very detailed that will go into how it was scored and more information for the products overall. But just clicking on a product will get you the overall information and where it landed in the LRTP as this draft, some product details and who the sponsor may be, and then the costs that are associated with the project. Again, just to round it out, if we go back to the LRTP page, we're going to be updating the document as we have more updates with the final document really coming out heading into November and having most of that really filled out and finalized before the committees and board adopted in December. So this will all stay up heading into December, but we'd really like to feedback as much as we can for projects and major changes to the document within the next few weeks. And then I'll turn it back over again to Melissa. Were there any questions that came through?
No questions so far, but again, if you do have any questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A and we can go over those together.
Great. And if there's any stakeholders on the line that still like to have a one-on-one meeting to discuss the projects, we can do that, or we can meet with anybody individually. And you can schedule a meeting through us, and we'll zoom into your location and we can discuss sort of how the product played out and anything else, what's next in the process for any of those products moving forward.
Andrew, I'm not seeing any questions come through, so I think if you and Stuart have anything that you'd like to wrap up, feel free to share that now.
I'd say once again, try to visit the website for any major updates. We're going to be presenting tomorrow at our in-person workshop, and then there'll be the committees in December, and then we do have that governing board meeting on October 31st, which is the first presentation to them. With that, thank you everyone for attending.